And I actually made a mistake recently when I was preaching.
Crucify him.
Yeah, crucify me, please. And I falsely said that the Romans would whip a person with like a cat of nine tails, and that 40 was considered the amount that you could take before you would die, and they would back it down one, and that would bring you to the brink of death or whatever. Well, anyhow, someone kind of challenged me a little bit on that logic and said, well, that was a Jewish custom and not a Roman law. And so I started digging into it. And that is, in fact, the case, that the Jews could not whip more than 40 times. And it had nothing to do with the person dying. It had to do with basically disgracing the person to an unreasonable level. What the Jews would do is when they would whip someone, they would whip them more with a strap than with a whip, or more like a cane. So like caning in Arabic countries and stuff like that. So it would certainly leave welts. It could possibly break the skin, but 40 would not cause death. And so that's just essentially an urban legend. They would do it in sets of 3, so that way they could count the sets of 3, and that would bring them up to 39. And they would stop at 39 because the limit was 40, and they didn't want to risk miscounting. So that left a buffer area in case they miscounted and they went over the law that was given to them that they could not whip someone more than 40 times. So why does that matter? It matters because the Romans had no such law. And actually even the cat of nine tails, I don't even think it was even fully developed at the time of Jesus' crucifixion. They would use something called a flagellum. The Romans had 3 different kinds of whips. They had a basic whip. That would be like kind of what you would think of as like, leather straps. Then they had one that was a little bit more severe that would actually break the skin. Then they had the flagellum. And the flagellum would usually have 3. It could have 9, but we don't know how many straps it would have on there. And on the end, it would have basically a spiked weight on the end of that. So they would whip it, and the spiked weight would stick in, and then they would yank it down. The Romans, not having any such rules as the 40, they would whip until they deemed it was enough. The purpose of whipping before crucifixion, it was actually law that if you're going to be crucified, you had to be whipped before you're crucified. And the reason why was because crucifixion would take an unreasonable amount of time had they not whipped you first. So the whipping would open up all your organs. They would expose you to that. You'd have enough blood loss. So you'd basically go into shock. They'd hang you on the cross. A few hours later, you'd be dead. Otherwise, you might be on the cross for a few days. They didn't really want that. They couldn't be bothered with that. So not everybody necessarily agrees with that the Shroud of Turin is actually legitimate. If I had to pick yes, it's true, or no, it's not true, I would pick yes, it's true from all the evidence that I've seen regarding that. They've counted the amount of whip marks on him using the flagellum. So you got the spiked ball with the laceration of the whip itself. 120 lacerations from this thing on the body. 120 times that he got hit. They're just beating him into a bloodied mass. Again, he never stopped anybody. He could have, how do you endure that?